Good morning, everyone. This is Lee Andrews and Shyamala Prayaga of Digital Assistant Academy here with you today on Voice Chat Friday. If it is 8 a.m., what better place to be than to talk about conversational AI design? Today, we are very honored to have a well-known individual in this space, Bret. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Shyamala. I really have been looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, we have been too.
Yeah.
We've actually been a little giddy. So truth be told.
Wow.
So thank you very much. The honor is all ours, and it is going to be the benefit of our audience. So I do think it would be interesting for the community to understand the relationship, how you and Shyamala got to meet, and you know, how you've been working on things together, or because you've got a podcast coming out, right, Shyamala, with Bret?
Oh, yeah, it was launched this week, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. So how did you two meet? How do you two know each other?
Oh, voice is an interesting space to be. First of all, it's very small, right? So when I was starting my journey in voice, I was looking at how to gain experience and knowledge. And that's when I stumbled across Voicebot.ai, which has like a lot of great research related to voice tech and voice industry in general, the usage kind of things, and the trends and all of these kind of things. So when I stumbled across that, I also stumbled across Bret's podcast, and where he brings in industry experts and talks about a lot of great things. So when I was scheduling my podcast episodes, I was like, I need to talk to Bret because he has a lot of great insights, and because my podcast is all about learning, right? So that's how we connected, and the rest is history.
That's great. That's great. And I put on the screen Voicebot.ai. That is your organization, correct, Bret?
It is. It's the place most people know us about. So that's where we have the daily news is sort of the key driver of a lot of the activity that we do, because we're publishing about 60 articles a month. In fact, what I should tell people is one of the reasons I started Voicebot.ai is because I'd done some research, written an article for Advertising Week, and people said, hey, where'd you get all that information? Now, this was way back in 2016 when there was really almost no sources of information. Occasionally, maybe The Verge or somebody would do something about it. And so I said, oh, I'll spin up a website and just give people links to all the research sources. And then I started just writing comments about it, and then they became articles. And then, you know, that in 2016, the week I launched, Amazon Echo and Echo launched in Germany and the UK. The next week, Viv Labs was acquired by Samsung for $200 million. That became the Samsung Bixby voice assistant. And then just a couple weeks after that, Google Home and Google Assistant were officially rolled out by Google. And then, you know, a month later, the first Google Home shipped. So it was something where there was a little bit of news, it wasn't being covered. Then all of a sudden there was a lot of news every week. And so it just turned into a full publishing enterprise around voice AI technologies that just didn't have a good home on the internet or anywhere where people could learn about it. So since that time, we've written over 3,500 news articles. We've published 24 in-depth reports. These things are dozens of pages, usually 30 to 50 pages long. Sometimes as many as 50 charts, hundreds of data points in every one of them. So it just really grew organically over time. And like Shyamala, we really just were focused on providing information to people so they could self-educate, and then being able to go a little bit deeper and answer the questions that we thought weren't being answered by maybe the general tech media press or other people who are in the space. And so that led to the podcast. And we have over 200 episodes of that right now. These are hour-long conversations with people who are really making a difference in the industry. So it's been a really fun time over the last almost 5 years now in this space. And I feel really honored that I've had the opportunity to meet people like Shyamala and all these other people who are actually making the industry. They're creating the industry in real time. And, you know, I've been able to, you know, talk to them about it. Maybe some of them have been able to help shape what they're doing, which has been really fun, and really just provide that service to folks, to provide them information that's more convenient to access, but that they didn't have access to before.
Interesting. I want to make a point to the audience. A lot of Shyamala's audience goes from a very wide range, Bret, from, you know, how do I spell conversational AI to, you know, what is the next thing that I need to be keeping my eye on? and trends and technology. And so I think what's important here is none of this happened by accident. So both of you have been involved in technology for many, many years, but Shyamala came from a very different background, meaning architecture. She was an architect, formerly trained architect. I'm not sure if you knew that, but she moved into this UX domain and then voice. And Bret, you came from a communications background, became a COO, a CMO, and an investor, as well as now owning this news, which has transformed into a research organization. Some of this was being aware, right, of what's happening around you. So there's actually no mistake, right, in how you got here. You paid attention. How did you know that this was the path, the right path for you at that time? Was it by accident, Bret, or or did you know? Are you just able to spot that next big thing?
Well, we'll use the term serendipity. I think so. A little bit of accident, a little bit of just the natural course of things. So I started out in technology consulting and software back in the 1990s. And so what we were doing then was bring people to the web. And one of the things that as I look back on that, it was such a significant transition because we lived in an entirely analog world. And we were moving into a digital world. And because of that, we had to create this entirely new digital world. And that was everything from being able to connect different entities together so they could transact and run commerce, but it was also building web pages or connecting backend systems to web pages so they could do online fulfillment that we just take for granted today. When I was working with Staples, the big office supply company back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was this idea of e-commerce was still very new. I mean, like you couldn't actually just see in fact, you couldn't actually see what they had available. You could place an order, but you didn't know if they could actually fulfill it. Right. And so these were some of the early back-end things. And then I was working with big banks and all these other types of things. And even as you said, in the telecom space, I remember doing some work with AT&T, which was very interesting, but that sort of shaped my thinking about what's going on in the world. And it just happens to be the timing of when I started working in this space. Every subsequent 3 or 4 years, there's been a very significant technology came out, whether it be RFID or social media or mobile. And in 2013, I was doing some work with several friends approached me about doing some things around that time. And I started doing some work on interactive audio advertising. And essentially, this was 2013. It was not long after Siri came to the iPhone. But the real revolution was the app ecosystem. And what they were seeing is, in particular in the app ecosystem, streaming music, whether it's radio or Spotify, Pandora, all these things were becoming hugely popular. And the ad model wasn't very effective there because what we found was 87% of the time someone was listening, they weren't looking at the screen. And so because of that, if there was an ad that came up and it was interesting and they were trying to do all this targeting to make sure they were serving interesting ads, the conversion rates weren't very good.
Yeah,
because there was no way to do that. And so I worked with a company at that time called Zap Media, and we delivered the first voice interactive advertising technology for these streaming services providers. We worked with some really big players in that space. And when an ad came up in the course of your listening, you could say, send coupon or take me to the store or whatever that thing. And it would just automatically happen. And so that was really fun. And because I had that perspective and we built internally, and some people, other people will know folks from the industry like Michael Myers at Zap or John Kelvey at Bespoke. They were doing the heavy lifting from a tech standpoint at that time. That was a really big innovation in the space because we actually had to build a voice assistant. Now, it wasn't the same type of assistant as you think of as Alexa or Google because it was really very focused on just hearing whether people wanted to interact with that ad. So we consider that like a very narrow domain. But because I had that experience, we saw Alexa early, we saw Amazon early when they were coming out with this. And I started doing some analysis, and then people knew that we had some expertise and that I'd seen it. And so they just asked us to write about it. And that's how it came about. And one of the reasons I do what I do, whether it be in the delivery side, the software development, product management side, or the marketing side, is because I really enjoy the new technologies. I enjoy teaching people about what's possible and then implementing it for them so that they can actually have this differentiation and really deliver a new type of value for their users.
So you take it from you're solving business problems from the ground up, right? So these are people who are trying to get their products to become more engaging, right? To bring that audience in through conversational AI or voice design, and then you're helping them measure and track the effectiveness of that capability. Do you take them all the way from start to finish?
And I think from a tech standpoint, generally, not just conversational AI, but that's really what I've done most of my career.
Okay.
And I would tell people, like, if they're familiar with the Peter Thiel 0 to 1 model, I usually work 0.5 to 1, right? It's after they've been in the garage, there's something that works. Maybe they have a customer or two, or they're about to launch, and then they're trying to get into market and grow, extend the technology, extend the value to consumers. It's at the point where the technology isn't in every home yet. Most people, almost nobody knows about it. Maybe 0.1% of the world knows about it, but sort of moving that up to the first 2 to 5% of the folks. And that's been fascinating just to have. I really feel privileged that I was where I was at a time that this market really became transformed.
Yeah.
It was a little bit after Siri, which was the only thing out there really for this, other than maybe IVR systems, which are quite different from what we have today, the assistant world. And then to be able to watch this grow up, and to also at the same time have the context of having been through the web and mobile and be able to see some of the common patterns. There are differences too, which I think is important, because some people wanted to say it's like mobile, for example, because that's what they're familiar with. But be able to see those patterns and say, hey, this is something that's actually really important. And I could see, a decade or 2 decades of development just in this market alone.
Yeah. What I'm finding fascinating about your career path and what you are doing right now to what there's seems to be a common thread that it's this curiosity that you have, right? The eagerness to learn, the willingness to share what you learn, but it's also, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, how important the ability to communicate is. How important the ability to capture information, communicate it out, and then translate complex data into usable, actionable steps that people can take as an individual or as an organization. I'm finding that those skills are just that's the foundation of, I think, the most successful people out there. Would you agree?
Well, no, I think there's a lot of ways to success. I mean, I know a lot of people who are just great technologists, scientists, researchers who do the breakthroughs. I know some people who are just really good at figuring out what the model is that will make something successful, like either the product model or the business model. But yes, I mean, there's this whole other area around communication. And if you think about it, a lot of ways, I think voice is easy compared to what I was doing in the 1990s, where people were like, they would only go to a store. There wasn't any concept that you could type online. And if you remember back then, people were afraid to put a credit card. What's going to happen?
I remember that.
Put my credit card. People don't even think about it now. Now they're trading Ethereum or Bitcoin and getting charged high gas fees. It's like it's a completely different world than it was. Although blockchain's sort of maybe at the way internet was in 1998, I think, or cryptocurrency at least is.
Right.
So, but I will say it's different. So I would say back then, the ability to cogently explain what's going on, how you're going to change or transform from where you are today to where you're going to go in the future was critical. We didn't have the same tools that we have today. And so I think that's part of it. It was, you think about it as more, if we use a military term, like hand-to-hand combat was the only thing we had. And then maybe a few years later we had artillery and now we have far more capabilities to go in and educate it at scale. Because we used to have these meetings. I'd be sitting down with one bank one day and the next bank the next day, and it was always the same thing. But it was like, now I would just say, oh, just go watch this 10-minute video, right? And so then we can say, oh, 100 banks can do this, or I don't have to come to you. Like I just did something for thinking of banks. I just did a presentation for a big bank in the U.S. and they had 400 people attend this online session, very much like this, right? Now I've done that same thing a couple of years ago with another bank in another country, and we had probably 300 people in an auditorium, but that thing took months to plan. This other one was like, hey, 2 weeks from Friday, could you do this thing? I've got all these executives who want to learn about this. I said, sure. So I'd say, yes, I agree with you, but I sort of think it's always been that way, that it's very hard, particularly in our space, because you have to create a way for people to understand what's happening and how it's different from what they have today. And then you have to find something that they already know and build on that and say, okay, you know this, here's how this new thing is going to be different than that, or is going to be similar to that, so that they can start to then conceptually understand where it's going. And then you can have the next conversation. But the first thing you have to do is get them over that hump of saying, hey, this is possible, or it's interesting, or it's meaningful. And then once you have their attention there, then you can go into all these details about like how to get it done. So you think of that why, what, how, that sort of cascading set of questions that you have to answer for them. And that's how they draw it in. And a lot of people opt out of that. So most people a lot of people are using voice technology, but most people are not implementing voice technology right now. If we think about from the B2B standpoint, a lot are, but we're still very early in the adoption cycle. And so a lot of the people, they've heard the why, they've heard the what, and they're like, it's not important to me right now. Maybe they're total skeptics, but a lot of them are just saying, not right now, right? And then there's others, like some big auto manufacturers that maybe made an announcement yesterday, which are, which have been saying yes for quite a long time, and have sort of, and they've been in the technology. A lot of the automotive predates. In fact, the first instances of these things that we think of as assistants, came out around 2000 model year cars. Jaguar S-Type was the one that I say is the first, although I think some other people say that maybe there was one other car that was a little bit sooner, but it was all within a 6-month period. But that was over 20 years ago.
Right.
So there's a lot of people who've been saying yes for a long time, and they've just been riding the improvement in the technology. But I would still say most businesses have not done anything with it. And that's the important thing to say, that this is still a very new market. It seems like it's been around for a while because people have Alexa or Google Assistant in their home, and they've been using it for several years now. There's a significant amount of mind share about what it can do from a consumer standpoint. There's not a significant amount of understanding of what it can do from a business standpoint. And even on the consumer side, we've only scratched the surface, because if you think about the new book that's out by Brad Stone, I think it's called Amazon Unleashed, sort of the second thing he did, the Everything Store, maybe 7-8 years ago. One of the things they talk about was Greg Hart, who was one of the first people he was the first leader of the Amazon Echo project for Alexa inside of Amazon. I think he said it's like delight and mundane. He's like, we're going to do like something to delight them, like music, like one thing or maybe two things, answer questions. And then everything else is going to be the mundane. And when they launched, it was very narrow. Now you think about Alexa and Google, they can do a lot more things now. But when they launched 2015, it was very revolutionary. And it really could. It could answer questions. It could play music. It could do timers and alarms, a couple other things, weather. But that was it. And so that was that whole idea of the mundane, but that was enough to get it started. And interestingly enough, those are the 5 use cases that people still use most frequently on the devices.
So we've grown, but we have a lot more room to grow with this capability within industry as well as
I would say that. Yeah, the adoption rate of like smart speakers is 33% in the US or 35% in the US. Just behind that, maybe just around 30% in Germany or the UK, and then a little bit behind that in other countries. So people think, we're sort of moving around, we're moving very quickly. I would say in general, in terms of what we're going to expect and see from voice assistants, we're maybe 5% into this process.
Wow.
Voice user interfaces are really going to be commonplace. You're starting to see them in mobile apps a little bit more, but I'm seeing some things with some technology that people didn't even know was possible. Like you can just talk and it doesn't even try to talk back to you. It just like, it brings up what you want instantly. And it's really much more of this idea, not that I'm going to have necessarily a conversation, but the technology is just going to allow me to use voice as an input, natural language, and then it's just going to give me what I want. It doesn't need to talk back. It just gives me what I want. And so like that technology, I think, is going to revolutionize web pages and mobile apps, but particularly the web, and nobody even knows about it.
Yeah, well, Bret, now you're getting me a little, now this is where, the non-professional in this domain, and the just common user is going to go, at some point, I'm not even going to need to talk. They're just going to be plugged into my brain and be able to do. Shyamala, I see you sitting there, but Bret, okay. So did you have something to say? I think I actually saw you raise a hand.
Yeah, no, so, it's interesting when you asked Brett that question and he was talking about it. I don't know, Brett, if you remember last year, not Voice Chat Friday. See, that's so much in my mind. Last year, when we had Voice in the Car Summit, every presentation had slide from Brett's deck, talking about the voice adoption curve and all the things, so what I have seen is it's not just, for educating ourselves, companies are also using, or individuals are also using it to evangelize internally as well and externally as well, the value of voice and what it can do and why we should invest and all of those kind of things. So that was an interesting thing which I really wanted to bring, because Bret has created a platform for education, and he has created something so that people can get everything in one place. But how it is helping individuals, organizations, those things cannot be described. So Voice in the Car was an excellent example. So that's what I wanted to say.
Okay.
To your point about the brain, now it's possible, like what you are thinking with the brain machine interfaces which are coming up, they can understand. So similar to how when you speak, you have some intentions, so your brain can also capture a lot of those things. And I have an episode coming up pretty soon with this one as well, how we can marry the brain machine interfaces and the voice interfaces together. And
okay, I was kidding, Shyamala, but you're serious.
Yeah, it's coming up pretty soon.
See, I'm a skeptic on the brain interface, I have to say. I think that's I know there's a lot of people who are doing really interesting work in that space, but I'm definitely a skeptic. I think that's much further down the road. I think that's probably maybe where VR was in 2008, maybe. And it's still not here, but yeah, I mean, that's something that, I think intuitively makes sense. I don't know if biologically it makes sense, but intuitively it makes sense. And we've seen a lot of really interesting things.
We need to have a conversation.
Voice is the sort of the thing for now, and we've really just scratched the surface with what you can do with that. One of the things I really think is interesting around voice is this idea of a true assistant, which is with us all the time. It's not this thing that's in a device that we have. It's with us all the time. Now, it might be through multiple devices. It could be through the home, it could be ambient, but it's going to be our companion throughout the day. And it's not just going to create services for us. It's going to help us augment our memory. And, I think a lot of people are going to be familiar with, Brian Romilly has been talking about this for a long time, but he's not the only one. I think he's one of the ones that's popularized it. But there are now companies that are doing just this, that they can augment your memory, or they can actually create they're working on creating I don't want to say a clone, but a version of you that could maybe attend a meeting and could interact with people in that meeting with you not being there, but give them your perspective, just based on the things that it's already gathered from what you've already done or spoken about in the world.
So Bret, this is way beyond the Jetsons for me. So let's, and you guys do know what the Jetsons are, right? So this is even beyond that. Bret, do you not know what the Jetsons are?
I'm sure I'm older than you. So yes, I know I grew up with that. His Boy Elroy
yes. So that kind of stuff I expected connected to my brain, and being in two places at one time. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that is even way beyond what I was expecting.
Yeah, that's a ways out, but there's some technology. This is being done today. I mean, people are creating these sort of virtual selves by these assistants are not only listening to what people's all day conversations, but they're observing all their online activity, and they're basically creating a profile. And so when they want to give people access to that, other people will be able to query that and get information, which is going to be based on an authentic representation that person has made somewhere in the past. It won't necessarily lead anytime soon to original thought, but it will do other things. It'll be able to connect to other type of intelligent agents on the internet and execute processes for people. However, I just say that I think that's really fascinating. I don't think that's today. I think we have another decade of other things to get through. If you just think about Bezos and Greg Hart and Ian Fried and those guys were talking about very early on with Alexa. They were just thinking about the computer and Star Trek. We're not there yet. We have elements of it, and there's sort of this similarity to what Alexa has become, for example, or the other smart speakers or assistants. But in terms of the capabilities, we still have a ways to go. And a lot of that's not just the consumer side, which is amazing because the consumer side came up very quickly on the side. So there's a general awareness that this is a thing. It can be valuable. It might be desirable even. But on the back end, we haven't done all the work that needs to get done. It's actually the opposite of a lot of situations that happens. And so this demand on the front end has created a pull on the back end. And so now a lot of organizations then are creating these voice affordances for their customers, whether they be business or consumer users. And at the same time, they're starting to integrate the capabilities of their backend systems, which can do fulfillment, which can answer questions, which can do things we haven't even thought of that the voice assistants that that you see today cannot do. They're not actually fully taking advantage of the technology that's actually available today. And so there's a lot of work to be done over the next decade to make that all available.
So we've talked a lot about the trends in the future and how that future is happening right now. We've got in our last 4 minutes. What I'd like to know is what is preventing? Where's the rest of that market? What's holding them back from adopting either on the industry or the consumer side voice AI? Because you mentioned that there's a lot of room to grow for this capability. What's holding people back? Businesses or individuals?
I don't know that there's anything really holding people back. I would say other than just being busy. So when you're running a business, the most important decision you make every day is what not to do, right? Because you can't do everything. You don't have unlimited resources. And so, for many people, whether it's the voice assistant or just a voice interface, just hasn't risen to that priority level yet, in part because maybe their users haven't said, you must have this or I'm leaving, which won't be too far away because the expectation level is rising. But sometimes they just have other things they have to do. They have to make payroll. They have to service a new client who wants a video interface or, something else. And it's the natural course of things. We aren't seeing quite the concentration that we saw in the late 90s around the web. We are seeing a little bit more around mobile, where it was a slightly more deliberate process. But then all of a sudden, like everybody had something for mobile. But that was even a 2-stage rollout because the idea of a mobile app wasn't really appropriate for everybody. But accessibility by accessing their information or services by mobile was important. So this idea that mobile web came up to sort of fill the gap. And I think that's sort of where we are with voice. There's certain types of people who have sort of gotten this idea on the front end of of that first stage, but then there's this other stage which is going to make it available to everybody. And I don't want to say it's like specifically app versus web, although there are some parallels to that. But I think that's really it. I think it's the natural course of things. In fact, we had a bigger surge early than we have in most markets in terms of adoption and awareness. And now if you just look at a traditional Gartner hype cycle, so we're going into that plateau of productivity. A lot of people are starting to say, okay, what can I build? And you're going to see when someone came out with a voice assistant, like in a mobile app a couple of years ago, it was news. There just weren't that many. Just like 5 years ago, if you had an Alexa skill, it was news because not that many people had them. It's not really news anymore. I mean, it is like for us, we cover it like as much as we can because we think it's interesting. But it's going to become so commonplace that people won't even do it. The response will be, "Oh, you're just doing that now," right? So that's where I think we are. We have a long way to go. The technology is really tremendous. We're not even taking advantage of how great the technology is today. There's a lot of people trying to build the next technology and saying, "Oh, we'll never get there without my technology." Of course, they have other types of incentives to make people think that. Sure. But I would say that what we have today is not being fully exploited to any large degree.
So, Bret, we could go on for at least 2 more hours. We've got about a minute left, and we haven't even talked about ethics. And that's what I thought might be one of the detractors, but it doesn't seem like that's a real issue, the ethics or the standardization or things of that nature.
I'm sure that is for some people. when they think about it, and that might slow adoption a little bit. But to me, I'm only seeing that at the margins. There's a few people that will use that, but that's not even usually the reason that they don't move forward. It might be something else, but then they're like, and ethics, right?
Right.
Or we need to sort this out. Every technology has these problems. We have to rethink. I'm sure when the wheel was introduced, we had to rethink our nature to how people move about goods and other humans. So that's something that I think is getting, in some ways, more attention early in the cycle than we would normally see. We didn't see the same type of thing with mobile. We didn't see the same type of thing with the web until much later in the adoption cycle, until it was actually a fact on the ground. It was something that had already been implemented. And then they're like, oh, wait, what about the ethics of this? How should we think about this? And what are the concerns? We're so conditioned now, having been through those other cycles, to understand there are unintended consequences associated with technology adoption, that we start thinking about these things at the beginning of the cycle. And for the most part, I think it's been very healthy, because what happens is then the creators of the technology take that into account, and they start building capabilities in that can address those things. They don't hit everything. And then there's also areas that are areas of disagreement, like differences of opinion about what's important to what degree. And then there's the trade-offs that you have sometimes. To do something that would meet one person's objective would then constrain the capability in such a way that it doesn't actually meet the objective to get that through. So I think there's all sides of the debate here. We talk about assistance in the home, and if you're blind, you might have a different idea than if you're really focused on consumer privacy in terms of how you look at this. But I've been very pleased to see these topics come up early in the adoption cycle, because I see steps being taken today to address it before it's at a point where it's very hard to address it.
Right. Well, good. It sounds like we've learned our lesson in one area.
No, we'll learn that lesson again. Don't worry.
Yeah. So before we disconnect, I do want to mention that you are on Clubhouse. You are a prominent figure in this space on Clubhouse. So please, if you're following DA Academy, make sure that you follow Clubhouse. Shyamala is there, as well as Bret. Great conversations are happening like this, but in much greater detail. And it's for all levels of understanding and skill that are in those Clubhouse areas. I also wanted to touch on this Botcoin thing that you mentioned early on. If you can just tell us in like 10 seconds what that's all about, that would be great.
I don't even know that I could do it in 10 seconds, but what I will say is that if you go to Voicebot.ai and just type in the search box Botcoin, there's a lot of information in there. It's a community project. There's a lot of people in the community that are using this. It's a cryptocurrency, but it's really more like rewards, and it's an affinity type of thing. If you think about like if we all just have something that we can sort of pass around and have some fun with, and people are incorporating it into games and other things too. So there's some really fun aspects to it. But again, this is another technology that we're bringing into the voice space to largely enhance the professional interaction among colleagues in the industry, but also sometimes with end users. So that's really fun. But what I would tell people is you can find more information on Voicebot. And then, on Clubhouse, at Bret Kinsella, every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And usually on Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern as well. But on Mondays, we have either a panel or someone who's prominent in the industry. We have an hour conversation. We bring people up on stage. They can interact with them. That's really fun. And then on Fridays, we usually we'll do it today at 3 p.m. Eastern. No agenda, it's just like anyone come up on stage. We talk about the news. We talk about other things that are going on, weekend plans. It doesn't matter. It's really much more fun for the industry. So Clubhouse has been a great place to engage with people, particularly since we don't see anybody anymore other than this type of interaction.
I know. All right. Thank you both for joining, and look forward to next week's Voice Chat Friday, and I'll be announcing who will be on that session. But in the meantime, Bret, thank you so much for all your effort and your insights to keep the world informed in this domain. And Shyamala, as always, thank you for your expertise and allowing us to have this session. You guys have a great afternoon. Enjoy the weekend, and be sure to catch Bret on Clubhouse today. You said 3 p.m. Eastern time?
Correct.
Is that right? Okay, great.
Every Monday and Friday.
Every Monday and Friday. There you go. Great. Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers.